Can the good fishing in the Hoosier National Forest in southern Indiana be made even better? A 3-year research project by an aquatic biology team headed by Dr. Thomas McComish, Ball State University biologist, proves it can. Dr. McComish talks to us today about his research to improve sport fishing in the National Forest. Dr. McComish, why was your aquatic team funded to research sport fishing in the National Forest?
The Hoosier National Forest maintains many different kinds of fishing waters and recreational opportunities for fishermen. And one of the things that they want to be sure about is that it is a pleasurable and a meaningful experience for them. So we were contacted to do some research on the ponds to be sure that the ponds were stocked properly with the right kinds of fish and had fish available then for fishing opportunities for the fishermen.
We joined you one day, and it looked like fun. It was for us for one day, and I imagine it is for you. Very interesting, certainly.
Well, it is fun. There's no question about that. It's always fun when you're doing something that you're very interested in. We do indeed enjoy the opportunity to do work for the Forest Service and other organizations that we do research for, but this is a particularly pleasurable experience because it's a very nice setting.
Let's take a look at that setting now via our videotape. This is where we met you that one day. This is one of 30 ponds you'll survey, one of 16 in which you've completed the survey, Oriole Pond.
That's correct. Oriole Pond is located in extreme southern Indiana, not too far from the Ohio River. It is quite a small pond, a little over 2 acres in size probably, and here we're backing our vehicle with the boat down to the edge of the body of water and getting ready to put our electrofishing boat into the lake and set it up, putting in our gear, our sampling gear, getting ready then to sample the body of water.
These are 2 members of your student team.
Yes, they are. These happen to be undergraduate students. We do have graduate students as well on our research activities. And here they're putting in the booms that will be fitted with electrodes that will hang in the water in the front of the boat. And it takes approximately an hour to get everything all ready and be sure that all of the safety devices are in place and that the unit is ready to operate.
This is the generator.
That is the control box, which will be hooked then to the generator, and then the whole thing is controlled from the rear part of the boat, which we'll see here in just a few moments.
As you told me, this is a boat that you designed just for this purpose.
That's right. It's a relatively large boat, a heavy boat, and a very stable one, so that we can have a very safe operation. It has a 230-volt generator that is positioned in the center of the boat, and then a treadle switch in the front, which allows the operator who's dipping fish in the front of the boat to control the electrical input. And here we're getting ready to begin sampling. I'm in the back controlling the electrical unit, and the students are getting ready to dip fish in the front as they are stunned and come to the surface. We go along quite slowly in shallow water, and as we encounter fish, they are momentarily immobilized, and we then can pick them up. And as you see, sometimes you have to dip fairly quickly in order to get the fish, but we place them into an onboard container that has fresh water in it circulating, and the fish then recover very shortly.
So the fish are not destroyed?
No, they're not destroyed, and that's one nice thing about this kind of a collection device, is that you get a very nice sample, and the fish can be evaluated and then returned to the water.
I noticed 2 lights on the front of the boat. Do you do this at night also?
Yes, that's one of the things about this sort of collection gear, is that it's more effective at night. The fish don't see the boat and they don't sense your presence at all. So we do all of our electrofishing at night for the most part, and that's when we can get our best results.
Now the fish are then brought ashore, and what do you do with them?
Well, we bring the fish to shore as depicted here. We remove scales from the fish, measure the fish, take those scales back to the laboratory and make plastic impressions, and then we can look at the plastic impressions of the scale to determine how fast they're growing, how old they are, and find out an awful lot about individual fish and about the individual fish populations.
I noticed we have what appeared to be a very large bass, and then a very small type, sunfish?
Yes, we're interested in all sizes of fish, and we're interested in the structure of the fish population. The fish population, after all, is composed of many different sizes of fish, and in order to tell if we have a balanced population or enough quality fish in the population, we have to have a representative sample of all sizes.
And this is the forest ranger, Mr. Pfefferman, who was observing that day.
Yes.
And here, what are you doing?
I'm getting a sample ready for water chemistry analysis. We do basic water chemistry and mapping on the ponds in addition to sampling the fish populations. This is so we don't expect too much from a body of water if it's not very fertile. It happens that these ponds in southern Indiana are quite infertile, and here we're checking for alkalinity to determine what the level is. If a pond or a body of water is highly alkaline, then it can be considered to have hard water and can be expected to be quite productive in terms of fish.
How does this one shape up?
Well, these bodies of waters are almost uniformly relatively infertile, and so the fish populations are not as large as they would be in, for example, northern Indiana.
Now, you wouldn't realize that from looking at the pond because you have your cat o' nine-tail growth and other growth along the banks.
Well, that's right, and that's one of the reasons for collecting the kinds of data that will give us information on the productive potential of these bodies of water.
Sight can be deceptive.
That certainly is correct.
And you're going over your report now with the forest ranger. Do they respond to your results?
Yes, the Forest Service has been very, very good about following our research evaluations and following our suggestions.
This is Dr. Byron Torkey of our biology department conducting a creel research. What is that?
Dr. Torkey is one of my colleagues who is interested in the creel evaluation of the ponds. What he does is to census these ponds, talking to the fishermen at particular times and locations to determine what they're catching, when they fish, who is fishing, what sort of success in general they're having, the reason that they come to the ponds, and other things that are important in determining how the Forest Service will manage these ponds.
Do the fishermen ever object to either you or Dr. Torkey poking around their favorite fishing hole?
No, it's surprising when we speak with them and explain what we're doing. They're very, very excited about it, and they're just like the Forest Service. They want to cooperate, and they know that if we're really doing a good job, that it's going to improve their fishing. And after all, that's what we're working toward.
You've completed research on some 16 out of the 30 ponds for which you've been funded. How do the 16 compare, say, with Oriole Pond? You say this does need some restocking. There is an imbalance. First, explain what the imbalance is and what will be done.
Okay. Well, as you noted, some of the ponds are imbalanced. There are numbers of different kinds of things that we might recommend for bodies of water once we have evaluated them. Some of the ponds need to be stocked. Some of the ponds will need to be drained perhaps and start over with a completely new population because they may be contaminated with undesirable fish. Others that we've evaluated have problems with the dams, with leakage. Others have too dense populations of vegetation so that the fish can't spawn and reproduce properly. And so there are lots of different reasons that come up from time to time that may have an impact on the fish populations.
And you've found these various problems within the 16 ponds that
That's
you've
right.
surveyed?
We have found approximately 20% needed nothing at all, and the remaining 80% needed something of some type, either restocking or renovation or repairs or some changes, maybe supplemental stocking. But I think that the Forest Service is finding that our evaluation is a very worthwhile one in bringing these ponds back into balance.
And of course they're interested in attracting people to the National Forest, so they will follow through on your recommendations.
That is exactly correct.
In your talking with Ranger Pfefferman at the location point where we videotaped, we heard you talking about cleaning out the entire stock of a pond. He mentioned that they sometimes take all of the fish out of a pond and restock. Is that done frequently?
That's probably a last resort scenario. Sometimes there's nothing else that you can do in order to improve a population besides that. So sometimes you will have to do that, but we usually try to work with what we have and improve what we have in some other way.
You mentioned one of the other problems, in addition to alkalinity or an imbalance in the kinds of fish, can be growth. Now, does the Forest Service go in there and remove that growth?
Well, there may be some situations where herbicides are applied to control vegetation. It may also be that if the fish are not growing well in a body of water, that there will be supplemental stocking of forage fishes, those small fishes that serve as food for the larger fish, in this case the bass. So sometimes that supplemental stocking is necessary to improve the growth of the fish. So growth of vegetation or growth of fish are two important things that we look at.
Also, on the day of our filming, we heard one of the fishermen talking about taking a 22 or 25-pound catfish out of that little Oreo pond. Does that sound? I'm sure he wasn't telling the story.
I think that is indeed possible. Some of these ponds have been there for many, many years. Also, some of these catfish that we find in the southern part of the state can grow very large, depending on the species.
Is there any favorite balance of fish? Do they want more largemouth bass? Do they want crappies, sunfish, or catfish?
There seem to be about 3 different classes of fishermen. Those that are interested in bass exclusively, those that are interested in catching bluegill exclusively, and those that are interested in catching catfish. Probably there are more bluegill fishermen than any of the others, but you've got some very avid bass fishermen in the area also.
How long will it take you to complete the rest of the ponds? 14, I believe you have left.
We're doing approximately 4 to 5 per year. So another few years and we will have completed our initial evaluation, but we're also going to go back and begin to look at these ponds a second time to see how they look after the measures that we recommended, how they look now, and if anything additional needs to be done to the ponds.
And all this in addition to your important research on Lake Michigan.
Well, yes, I'm busy, but I love it, and so what can I say? It's a fisheries biologist's life dream to do these sorts of things.
Well, and I know you enjoy it because as we were leaving, you were talking to your student assistants, telling them to get the fishing gear, and you said, "Let's go fishing." That's what you do at the end of the day.
That's right.
Good. Thank you very much, Dr. McComish.
Thank you.
2nd District Congressman Phil Sharp addressed Ball State University faculty and administrators at the beginning of the fall term. At a news conference prior to the talk, he answered questions about what, if any, action is considered by Congress in the area of education bills. The president of Exxon Researching and Engineering Company suggested in a recent issue of the Chronicle for Higher Education that instead of thinking big about financing a space station or Star Wars, we should be thinking in terms of smaller research projects, the kinds that colleges and universities do best. He says that these research programs that help push back the frontiers most important to American industry. How is Congress likely to react to this approach to financing research?
Well, there has been discussion over the last several years of that kind of proposition and a concern that perhaps too many resources are being drawn off into sort of grand projects that may or may not work when little money in the hands of a lot of people might have a longer-term impact in developing basic science and research in this country. And so I think there is an effort to try to counterbalance that drive for the grand projects. But there's always a tension there between different goals, among different goals, and so it's awfully hard to know how it's going to work out in time. At the moment in the defense budget, for example, an awful lot is being drawn off into Star Wars. In fact, Star Wars is not one project. Of course, it's going to be thousands and thousands of little research projects, some of which may have relevance for other things. But there is some concern that perhaps too great an emphasis, certainly the Congress is not as willing to go as far as the President in putting so much of the budget into sort of one direction.
The Reagan administration is interested in reducing spending on student financial aid programs, and there's some talk on agreement on reducing this $800 million over the next 3 years on the guaranteed student loan program. How much is Congress willing to revise the student aid program?
Well, first of all, the Congress has overwhelmingly rejected on a bipartisan basis the deep cuts the administration on several different occasions has proposed, and which I think represents a very strong commitment to financial aids and education in general. But given the enormity of the deficit problem, financial aids and everything else can't escape some scrutiny by Congress, and the present budget resolution does anticipate an $800 million savings over 3 years in student financial aid, which has got to be squeezed out of somewhere if that goal is in fact finally met. The hope of many on the education committees is that they can meet that goal without actually reducing the amount of money that reaches students, in other words, through improved efficiencies in this very large program. But there's grave doubt you can get $800 million out of that just in improved efficiencies. There will be arguments over equity, arguments over efficiency in the system, but at the moment the betting sort of is in Washington, there will not be major changes, so that the funding level will be roughly a plateau level, and that the basic structure of the program will probably remain roughly as it is. If the budget is ever back into better shape, I think there will be a resurgent interest in better federal funding.
If there is a reduction in funding, of course, it is going to affect the low-income and minority students.
No question, and it gets at one of the I hope central value concerns in this country, and that is that everybody have an opportunity and have a chance at opportunity. Those people who are willing to work and try to educate themselves have that chance. And so even marginal changes in federal funding clearly affect some individuals in that respect.
What do you think the Congress will do with proposed tax reform legislation that would restrict charitable contributions, reduce tax credits for corporate-sponsored research, eliminate the deductibility of state and local taxes for a university, and stop the use of tax-exempt bonds for student loans and university facilities?
Well, the Ways and Means Committee in the House later this month is to begin consideration of those proposals that President Reagan has made to the Congress. It's very difficult to anticipate what will come out of this. One speculation is that the charitable deduction proposal, the reduction in that will not happen, that there is a strong support for the charitable deduction, that is for even those who don't take the long form to be able to deduct it, and that's important to education as well as a lot of other institutions in this country. It's a little harder to speculate on the other items. They're not as significant in terms of total federal revenues, though they can be very significant, as your question suggests, in terms of higher education institutions and research in this country. I'm inclined to think that the purposes that those present deductions, therefore, are ones that have strong support, suggesting that some version of them is likely to survive. But everything is up for grabs for the first time in a long time in the tax code, and speculation is all that any of us can offer at this point.
Some university administrators have expressed concern about government putting more restraints on scientific research in colleges and universities and meddling in the institution's right to govern. Are you getting any feedback on this, and is there a cause for concern?
Well, I have had some. It's not an area that I have been as close to and as knowledgeable about as I probably am going to have to become. It is surprising that is happening at a time when the general political drift is toward less governmental intervention. And so I would hope that, except where extreme concerns about safety whether it's in biological research, for example, or something, except where those kinds of things exist. I would hope that we would not see the heavy hand of the federal government come crashing down on our institutions. I think that's not a good long-term policy.
What other legislation affecting higher education is scheduled for discussion in the House and Senate?
The largest one is the one you've already asked about, which is the reenactment of the higher education legislation, which basically deals with the student financial aids. That is really the central one. The tax credits are a part of the tax bill, of course, and could have an impact, but financial aids is where the argument is going to be. Though, as I suggested, what I'm at least hearing from some of my colleagues on the Education Committee is not to expect dramatic changes, though frankly there's a recognition there's plenty of possibility for improvement in that system.
Reports indicate there will be fewer students graduating from high school in the next decade, meaning smaller enrollments at colleges and universities. With us to discuss this and other problems related to enrollment is Dr. Robert W. Fletcher, newly appointed Assistant Dean for Enrollment and Student Services at Ball State University. And I might say Dr. Fletcher new on the job some 7 days. We have some questions for you, Dr. Fletcher, about the expected decline in enrollment of high school graduates during the next 10 years. Where are we going to find the students to fill the classes?
Well, there are certainly a couple of ways that student enrollment will be affected in the next few years. It'll be something different, and we've all heard and read a lot about declining enrollments in colleges and universities. Yet at the same time, and we can't project. We can look at history and we can look at historical data and talk a bit about college participation. And of course, we all know about the changes in technology and the pronouncements by people like chairman of the board of GM about the interest he has in liberal arts majors, etc. What I'm leading up to is to say is that I think we can project safely that there'll be some fluctuation in the number of students who go on to college, and certainly that number will probably continue to increase. However, the number of available students will decrease traditional high school students. There's yet a second area where I think it's safe to say that some institutions will see increases, and that'll be in what has been called, and I don't know that I like the term, but non-traditional, or students who have already earned a baccalaureate degree going back for retraining, upgrading, master's programs, etc. And certainly those are areas that we can expect to see some things. There'll also be the advantage or disadvantage, depending on what kind of institution you're in, into the cost. We know that the cost of college, and for the public sector certainly, it's a tremendous value. Ball State University offers a tremendous value to a student in terms of the instruction they receive for the costs that they incur.
What enrollment level has Ball State set as its goal?
As you indicated early in the interview here, having been here just over a week, I can only repeat what I've heard the President say in the convocation here this week, and that would be in the neighborhood of 16,000 students, not much different than we are right now. So in that range, we wouldn't expect to be less than that. And certainly it could be more than that to spotlight, maybe accentuate the positive rather than the negative.
There is going to be more competition, though, for that student. Where are we going to find them?
Well, I think in the programs, the majors that are available to the undergraduate and graduate students will, of course, be critical in terms of attracting them. As I said before, those areas are certainly well represented by Ball State in terms of both the liberal arts and the professional type programs. We know, for example, and very recently, like this week, of teacher shortages too that will be occurring. And so we can look for some shifting of students. The other part of that formula is how well an institution can retain those students that it attracts, and that certainly impacts enrollment and has to do with what happens with those students. And as we see the high schools and others increase those graduation requirements, etc., I think we can look for our retention rates to improve also.
With everyone out trying to get the good student, what plans does Ball State University have to recruit the superior students?
Ball State has a very long tradition of recruiting students of a high caliber, high achieving students. And I say that knowing what little I know about such things as our honors program, Honors College, a new thrust of University College to help the undecided major, We know that most students change their major 3 to 4 times while they're in college, national average. So certainly those people are fluctuating around. I think with Ball State, to speak to Ball State for a moment, and as a newcomer, one thing that I can say is that the campus is a particularly cordial place where people are open. It's a teaching institution, which I think is important to the student, to the quality of the undergraduate program. Prides itself on teaching and applied research, which I think will become more and more important to students because of the faculty involvement, faculty commitment, if you will, to the quality of the undergraduate program. And so I would look for those things to be particularly attractive to those honors or merit type scholarships, scholar type students. And what we need to do, I think, at Ball State is to get the student and the parent or the family onto the campus to compare us to others, to sit down and talk with some of the people who actually provide the instruction in those programs, and then let the student decide. I'm quite certain that we'll do very well as long as we can get them to compare us to what's available at other institutions.
We hear educators talk about changes going into the 1990s. How about the age of students? Do you think we'll be dealing with an older student? Obviously, in some ways, you mentioned those going back to school for a higher degree, master's and graduate and so forth. But those entering at the freshman level, do you think we'll be dealing with an older student?
I think that certainly that the average age will probably continue to go up slightly. I don't know how much impact that'll have. Certainly that was the issue that we were talking about in terms of the retraining or re-educating and the career changes that people make, you know, in their professional life, which we know also runs about 3 or 4 times. So there is that option. I think with the traditional student, in the early 90s there will be a small increase. We know that K through 12 enrollments are going up right at the moment a bit. So we can look for that age to possibly inflate slightly. I think for our institution, and depending on how many people we serve in our region and how heavily we are involved with industry in terms of courses that are delivered on site for them, you know, that we can expect that age to increase. We'll still have a very strong traditional, quote-unquote, student that will service here on our campus.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Robert W. Fletcher, newly appointed Assistant Dean for Enrollment and Student Services at Ball State, our guest. Thank you for joining us.